important mitzvah, commandment, and that is the commandment of tzedakah, of giving charity. The Torah tells us that we are to give 10% of our earnings to charity. And I'll quote you the pasuk. The pasuk says in chapter 14, verse 22, Aser te'aser, take maaser, et kol tevuat zarecha, from all of the produce of your land, ayotzei hasadeh shana shana, that comes from your land each and every year. So the Zera Shimshon quotes to us from the Talmud that tells us, if you give your 10%, you will become wealthy. As he quotes, Aser bishvil shetit asher. Give 10% in order to become wealthy, which is contrary to what we would think happens. If a person has $100 and they give $10 from that 100, they're left with 90. They're now left with less than what they gave. And this is because this is the only mitzvah, the only commandment that we have that we can fulfill and test God, so to say. Meaning, if a woman lights Shabbat candles, she can't say, because I'm lighting Shabbat candles, Hashem, you have to do this. You can request it, but you cannot force. And same thing for a man. A man cannot put on tefillin and say, Hashem, because I'm putting on tefillin, you have to do this. Or because I'm keeping Shabbat, you have to do this. No other mitzvah. Although we have to do all the other mitzvot, we cannot force Hashem to do for us anything. The only mitzvah that we're able to, kivyachol, as if saying, put God up against the wall, can you imagine? And say, you have to do for us, you have to do for me if I fulfill this, is the mitzvah of giving charity. The only one. Now some ask, why? How come? Well, really, it is very hard to give of money that a person earned. It's very hard. When you make money, you become attached to it. It's yours. Why don't I need to give it? You can't force me to give it. Hashem says, I'll test you. We'll see your emunah. Where does the money come from? Did it come from your hard work? Or did your hard work enable me, God says, to provide you with that success? And then if a person has emunah, they understand that they are just a vessel in order for Hashem to place a livelihood in and to disperse it amongst the needy. Then Hashem keeps on replenishing and replenishing. And then has to give the individual a greater vessel in order to receive more and more and more. And again, this is something that we are able to test God with. So he quotes the Talmud that says, give in order to become wealthy. Then he quotes the Midrash. The Midrash says, you want to know your best value, your best investment on charity? It's to give charity to Torah scholars, to those who learn and teach Torah. For example, a yeshiva, a kollel, avrechim. This is the greatest charity. And the Zera Shimshon makes a cute connection between giving in order to become wealthy and making sure to give to Torah scholars. If we look at the beginning of the verse, again, chapter 14, verse 22, it said, Aser te'aser, which starts with an ayin, aser, and taf for te'aser, ayin and taf. He says also, you know how you become wealthy when you give charity? It's when you give to another acronym that starts with ayin and taf, to amelei Torah, to those who toil and dedicate their lives to Torah. So Zera Shimshon puts the Gemara and the Midrash together. Now he goes and he gives us the prime example of what it means to support Torah study. And he takes us back to two of the tribes, to Zevulun and Issachar, both children, brothers, and children of Yaakov Avinu. And they made a deal. They made a partnership, the two of them. Zevulun said, I'm going to go and I'm going to work hard and I'm going to provide for a livelihood. And that livelihood is going to be enough. And we're going to split it. We're going to split half for you, Issachar, and half for my family. And you and your family are going to dedicate your lives towards learning Torah, and I will dedicate my life towards making a parnasah. And the parnasah will be split, and the merit of your Torah study will also be split. Half for you, Issachar, and half for me, Zevulun would say. And this is how they did it. So the Zera Shimshon says it's a beautiful concept. It's so noble of Zevulun for him to dedicate his life to working hard in splitting the profits. But why was it only these two brothers, or these two individuals, out of all of the tribes, who made such a deal? It would have been nice. What if Gad and Asher made theirs? And then another two tribes, maybe pair up all the tribes, all 12 tribes, so that there's 6 working and 6 learning. Why was it only Zevulun and Issachar that had this? The Zera Shimshon asks. So listen to how he answers. He answers by quoting the Talmud. The Talmud is in Masechet Pesachim. Talmud in Masechet Pesachim says as follows. There is no mazal, there's no good luck for, now take this with a grain of salt until we explain, for an international businessman. International businessman? Why can't he have good luck? Why can't his hard work and his success provide a fruitful livelihood? Why is there no mazal? So the commentaries explain on the Gemara that since this international businessman has to go and take a ship and set out to sea, and the sea is the most dangerous place, or traveling in the wilderness in the desert, which is also dangerous, with pirates in the desert as well as pirates in the water. And the ocean has its own storms. And in the desert there's also sandstorms. Traveling and going international comes with danger. But what? Very often, hopefully, we hope that the businessman comes home safe. But he came home safe through prayer from his family, or for himself, and he was spared and he was saved. The problem is since he was spared and saved, some of his merit from other good things that he did was now taken off, removed from there, in order to just grant him life, in order to survive his travels. So that's why there's not too much mazal by a businessman who has to travel. Because by traveling, he is putting his life in danger. And hopefully, if he survives and succeeds, it took away merit from other good deeds, which could have went elsewhere. Okay? The Zera Shimshon says that's true by all businessmen, except for one. For the businessman which takes charity and dedicates his charity, his 10%, towards Torah study, towards the support of Torah study. Again, yeshivot, kollel, where you have rabbis or you have avrechim learning Torah, teaching Torah, studying it, sharing it with one another. There's nothing like it. And he says, why? He says, because when a person now commits themselves to give their charity to Torah study, now they don't need merit, even though they're international and even though they might be in a life-threatening situation. But since now they've committed themselves for their earnings out of their profits, 10% to go to Torah study, that means their success is now in the merit of the Torah. It's not in their own merit. And therefore, their own merits are not going to be taken away because they survived. Rather, their merit and their success is infinite. There's no limit to it, since they are now, and they have now committed themselves to supporting Torah study. So this just takes a whole new level. Charity makes a person more wealthy. Gives a person, if they test Hashem, it will work. And then giving specifically to Torah study is the most noble and the most profitable charity a person can give from themselves. So now the Zera Shimshon goes back, look how beautiful, and he answers the question. Why was it only Zevulun and Issachar that made such a deal? He bases it on a pasuk, the end of Bereshit, when Yaakov Avinu was blessing his children. And he bases it primarily on Zevulun's situation, on the geography of where he was set up. I quote you the pasuk. The pasuk is in Bereshit chapter 49, verse 13, and it says as follows. Zevulun lechof yamim mishkon. Zevulun will dwell on the coast of the seas. And therefore, Zevulun, if you look at the map of the division of the land for the tribes, Zevulun had the majority of the ocean or the sea frontage. So because he was, the Zera Shimshon explains, because he was at the coast, he could not make a livelihood for himself from the land that he lived on. It was beach land for the most of it. So, what did he have to do? He had to go international. He had to set sail. He had to go out to the ocean. But he realized two things. Number one, it's going to be dangerous for him. And number two, it's going to be very time consuming. He's going to spend a lot of time on that. So he took his dear buddy, his dear brother, Issachar, and he said, you're inland, you are going to stay and work. You are going to stay and learn. And I, since I'm forced because of my situation to go work, I'm going to work, and you are going to provide the merit. I'm going to provide the livelihood, he said, and you're going to provide the merit from the Torah study. All the other tribes, they were inland. They were able to work their land. They were able to work part of the time and study Torah part of the time. So they didn't need to make a deal. But Zevulun, on the other hand, had to seek out another one of his brothers, one of his fellow tribes, to make a deal, since he would be fully engrossed in business. So he needed someone else to balance him out, and that was Issachar. There's many lessons we could learn. First is the concept of understanding that as Jews, we have a choice. We have three choices, basically. Choice number one is to be completely engrossed in Torah study, which is very hard. It's a big challenge. It's a challenge financially and even mentally. Some people just can't sit and learn and teach. It's very hard. On the other extreme, you have individuals who are completely engrossed only in business. And then you have people who are able to make a happy medium, which is very hard, and learn part and work part, which would be the ideal. That's what the majority of the tribes did. But we have to look at Zevulun's maturity. His maturity of knowing that he would be most of his time having to work. And if people, which most Yehudim, put their majority of their time into working, we have to be and realize that because we're doing that, we have to be mature enough to go seek out our Yisachar. Which kollel, which yeshiva, which Talmidei Chacham are going to be our recipients of our tzedakah in order that we can have the merit like Zevulun did, which was protection, which was to become more wealthy, not to remove any merit because of the danger that a person put themselves in. That's the first concept. The second concept is a true story that I just heard a couple days ago, and it's based on the idea of giving charity even when it's hard. I heard this story from my neighbor that he knows the individual firsthand. This was an individual who came from Eretz Yisrael, an Israeli Jew who moved to the States, and he came and he had no more than $400 in his pocket and not a penny else to his name, just that. So one time he saw a wealthy Syrian Jew, and he went up to him and he told him, "I beg you, tell me your secret." He told him, "For what?" He says, "I want to be rich like you." He says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I only have $400 in my pocket. I want to be like you. Tell me what you did and what you do to get to this place, to this amount of wealth, and I'll do it." He told him, "Okay, you ask, I'll give you the answer. But it only works if you do it." He told him, although the Torah says that there's an obligation to give 10% of profits of one's earnings, he says, I go above the letter of the law, and I give no less than 20% of the profit that I make, of the earnings that I bring in, to charity. And he says, not only do I give it right away. Even though according to the halakha, you don't need to give it right away. You have some time. You at least have till Rosh Hashanah to do so. So I do it right away. So look what this Israeli Jew did. He stuck his hand in his pocket. Quick math. If he had 400 in his pocket, how much should he pull out? 80. He pulled out $80. That's 20% of his net worth. And he gave it to the wealthy man. And he told him, give this to your rabbi. Give it to him and let him disperse this to charity. Because from now on, I'm going to keep this promise. The man today is a major league guy. don't want to say his name, I don't want to say which business he owns, but he took upon himself from that day that he gives no less than 20% right away. My neighbor told me he's been with him where he almost freaks out and he quickly calls the bank or quickly logs on his online banking to see if any money came in so that right away he gives his 20%. Now again, it's not something that we have to do. It doesn't need to be 20%, it could be 10, and it doesn't need to be right away. But if a person goes the extra mile, and it hurts, some people make enough to spare 10% or 20%, and some people don't. But if a person goes out of their way and they test God and say, Hashem, it's tight for me, it's hard for me, but I will give it because that's the right thing to do, because you gave me in order to help others. We always want to be the one giving and not the one receiving. And therefore, if a person is up to this test, up to testing themselves on their level of emunah, and specifically testing Hashem on this one, this is the only one we can test him on, we can go out and give even when we're doubtful, even when we might be too convinced. As long as it's going to a worthy cause, and as we've learned, the greatest cause, the support of Torah study, one will never become poor or hurt from giving charity. You can only, and you will, as the Torah says, become only wealthier.